In the remote hills of Romania, 1899, a small village lay shrouded in perpetual fog. The people were simple farmers, living their lives unaware of the shadow that would soon consume them. Father Anton arrived that year, a priest with piercing eyes and a presence that commanded respect and fear simultaneously. From his first sermon, there was something unsettling in his voice, a tone that seemed to reach beyond words, touching the deepest fears of the villagers. Children clung to their mothers, sensing an invisible weight in the air. The village elders whispered among themselves, unsure whether this man was a blessing or a harbinger of doom. Yet no one dared challenge him. Within weeks, his influence spread. Observing the villagers' routines, he began instituting rituals, subtle at first, marking homes with small symbols, instructing families in precise patterns of prayer, and demanding silence during certain hours. Those who hesitated felt a strange pressure, a growing unease that could not be ignored. Nights became tense, shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally under the moonlight, and the fog thickened, creeping along paths with uncanny awareness. Children were warned not to stray, told that the forest beyond the village hid dangers far worse than wolves or thieves. Parents complied, fearing not just punishment but the consequences of incurring Father Anton's displeasure. Rumors began circulating. Some villagers claimed to see ghostly figures gliding among the trees, always at a distance, watching, waiting. Others reported hearing whispers that seemed to echo their own thoughts, guiding them to correct behavior or warning them of mistakes. Father Anton did not speak of magic, nor did he claim divine powers beyond his holy duty. Yet the village sensed an invisible force in his presence. Over months, compliance turned into instinct. Children memorized the subtle signals of the fog, the rustling of leaves and the shadows' movements. Even ordinary objects became charged with meaning. The placement of candles, the alignment of talismans, the order of household items, all observed and subtly corrected by the priest. Families began to isolate themselves at night, fearful of attracting unseen forces. Travelers avoided the village entirely, drawn only by curiosity, and those who dared enter rarely spoke of it again. The environment itself seemed complicit. The forest shifted unpredictably, obscuring paths or revealing hidden markers. Animals acted strangely, avoiding certain areas without explanation. The villagers learned quickly. Obedience ensured survival. Deviation invited the unknown. Each act of compliance reinforced Father Anton's power. Even the simplest gesture, a bow, a touch, a glance, was evaluated, consciously or subconsciously, by all present. Fear and reverence intertwined, creating a culture of silent observation and unwavering vigilance. Scholars who later investigated the village centuries afterward struggled to explain the phenomena. Instruments failed. Compasses spun erratically. Photographs captured only distortion. Every attempt to measure or record the village's environment resulted in anomalies that could not be rationalized. It became clear that the village existed under the influence of forces beyond scientific understanding. Generations passed. Children grew into adults, internalizing rituals that were initially imposed. Silence, observation, and caution became instinctive. The forest, shadows, fog, and subtle environmental cues served as both teachers and enforcers. Even ordinary human interactions were affected. Conversation was measured, gestures controlled, and eye contact cautious. Stories of disappearances persisted, though no one could confirm the details. Those who vanished were whispered to have become part of the village's unseen system, absorbed into the network of observation and fear that Father Anton had established. The priest's health declined, yet his influence did not waver. His final days were shrouded in mystery, and his death did not diminish his control. Rituals continued, and the village remained bound to the patterns he had established. Time seemed to slow, and generations lived in a perpetual cycle of vigilance, compliance, and fear. The villagers' lives were dictated by an invisible authority, maintained through shadow, fog, talismans, and instinct. Scholars visiting centuries later described a community shaped entirely by mystery and fear, a place where natural, psychological, and possibly supernatural forces converged. The ending of the priest's personal story mattered little. His legacy endured. Every household, every path, every ritual bore his mark. Shadows continued to move with purpose. Fog shifted strategically, and whispers lingered in empty streets. Even new generations born long after his death instinctively understood the rules. Silence was sacred. Obedience was survival. Mystery was power. The village stood as a chilling testament to the extent of influence one individual could impose, transcending life and persisting through fear, ritual, and unexplainable phenomena. The village rested in a narrow valley surrounded by dense, dark forests. Homes were modest, built from stone and timber, clustered close together as if instinctively seeking protection. Smoke curled from chimneys, mingling with the persistent fog that seemed to seep from the forest itself. Villagers rose before dawn, tending fields and livestock, their lives simple yet disciplined. Life had its rhythms, unbroken until Father Anton arrived. He was tall, gaunt, and carried an aura that drew attention immediately. His eyes were dark and penetrating, giving the impression that he could see past the physical into the hidden thoughts of those he observed. The villagers, cautious and polite, welcomed him with ceremonial respect. Yet unease settled like a second skin over the community. Father Anton's sermons were not loud or theatrical, but every word struck with a weight that lingered long after the congregation dispersed. It was not merely his message, but the rhythm, the pauses, the cadence, each carefully measured to instill reflection and perhaps fear. Children sensed the difference instantly. They listened with wide eyes, absorbing not only words but subtle signals in tone, gesture, and expression. Within days, he began introducing rituals into daily life. The villagers were instructed to perform specific prayers at exact times, align objects in precise ways, and maintain silence in particular areas of the village. Small talismans were placed in homes, their significance explained in hushed tones. Parents complied, fearing not punishment alone, but the consequences of disrupting the invisible order Father Anton was establishing. Shadows behaved strangely under his watch. At twilight, long shapes stretched across the village square, occasionally moving contrary to the sun's light or lingering where no human presence existed. Fog thickened unexpectedly, obscuring familiar paths and forcing villagers to navigate cautiously. Even animals adapted instinctively. Livestock avoided certain areas without obvious reason. Dogs growled or whimpered at unseen presences. The forest itself seemed alive, reacting subtly to the villagers' actions. A child stepping off a path might hear a whisper among the leaves or see the fog shift as if guiding them back. Villagers interpreted these occurrences as warnings or lessons from Father Anton. The priest observed silently, rarely intervening directly, yet his influence pervaded every corner of life. Those who faltered in ritual or obedience experienced unnerving sensations, a chill, a sudden shadow, a low whisper that echoed personal fears. Over weeks, compliance became instinctive. Children learned to anticipate signals from the fog, shadows, and environment. Adults adjusted behavior to avoid subtle reprimands. Scholars visiting decades later struggled to quantify the village's unusual cohesion. Measurements failed. Compasses spun and instruments produced erratic readings. It was as though the village existed under laws of reality, separate from the outside world. The alignment of talismans, the sequence of rituals, and the pattern of daily life collectively maintained the village's equilibrium. Father Anton's presence, even posthumously, was embedded in these practices, a legacy of meticulous control and subtle enforcement. Visitors often reported a palpable tension, a sensation of being observed even when no one appeared present. Those who ignored the rules or tried to interfere with rituals frequently disappeared, leaving behind nothing but a whisper among the trees or a distorted shadow captured in fleeting photographs. Over time, the villagers internalized lessons not as imposed obedience but as instinctive awareness. Life became a delicate dance between visible and invisible, known and unknown, safe and dangerous. The valley, the village, and the forest together formed a system in which survival depended on perception, vigilance, and adherence to ritual. Each generation was born into this reality, learning through observation and subtle correction rather than direct instruction. By the turn of the century, the village had transformed into a living monument to Father Anton's control, a community whose cohesion and behavior were maintained through fear, mystery, and the unseen forces that seemed to govern the fog, shadows, and forest. The villagers' understanding of their environment grew increasingly nuanced. Every sound, every movement, and every shadow carried potential significance. Children learned to read the rustle of leaves, the angle of fog, and the flicker of candlelight as messages of compliance or warning. Parents silently guided them, reinforcing rituals and ensuring that no deviation went unnoticed. Talismans became central to domestic life. Some were worn around the neck, others placed above doorways or hidden in alcoves. Their purpose was both protective and disciplinary, a tangible reminder of the priest's influence. Even minor misplacement resulted in subtle disturbances. Doors creaked, shadows stretched in odd directions, or whispers echoed in empty rooms. Over the years, these practices became deeply ingrained. Adults navigated the village and forest with instinctive caution, while children internalized lessons through observation and experience. Scholars visiting decades later noted the village's remarkable cohesion and precision. Instruments failed to measure environmental anomalies accurately. Compasses spun and cameras captured distortion. Attempts to rationalize these phenomena fell short, reinforcing the perception of an invisible authority. The forest surrounding the village acted as both barrier and enforcer. Paths shifted subtly, guiding compliant villagers and discouraging exploration. Animals mirrored human caution, avoiding certain areas or displaying unexplainable behavior. Even the fog seemed to respond intelligently, concealing danger or revealing markers aligned with rituals. Father Anton's influence endured beyond his physical presence. His teachings, rituals, and the placement of talismans perpetuated a system of control that persisted for generations. Silence was maintained not only through fear, but also through environmental cues and subtle social enforcement. Disappearances, though infrequent, reinforced obedience. When villagers vanished, the event was attributed to a mixture of supernatural forces and ritual misalignment. Their absence served as a warning, further embedding the lessons of vigilance and compliance. Over decades, life became a continuous interplay of observation, ritual, and instinctive adherence to patterns. The villagers' collective behavior was a testament to the enduring power of fear and subtle influence. Scholars documented these patterns with fascination, acknowledging that the village functioned under principles beyond conventional understanding. Children who grew up in this environment internalized rituals and cues as second nature. Adults observed deviations immediately, correcting without overt instruction. Shadows, fog, and talismans collectively enforced a discipline that was both psychological and seemingly supernatural. By the early 20th century, the village had evolved into a self-sustaining system of ritual, observation, and environmental interaction. Visitors reported an uncanny sense of being observed and guided, often leaving unnerved or never returning. The village remained a living monument to Father Anton's legacy, a community shaped entirely by fear, ritual, and the unseen. Every action, from minor chores to ceremonial gatherings, was governed by instinctive compliance with invisible rules. Shadows moved with purpose, fog shifted according to unwritten patterns, and whispers echoed through empty streets, reinforcing vigilance. This system persisted unbroken across generations, embedding mystery, fear, and obedience into the very fabric of daily life. Life in the village became inseparable from its environment. Deviation from ritual or observation threatened both personal and communal equilibrium. The influence of Father Anton endured, his legacy encoded in the fog, shadows, and the silent obedience of generations. As years passed, subtle shifts began to unsettle the village's fragile equilibrium. Whispered rumors circulated about villagers who had tested the limits of obedience, venturing into forbidden areas of the forest or disregarding talismanic instructions. Though these events were rare, their impact was profound. Children who wandered slightly off the path reported seeing fleeting shadows that seemed to follow, vanishing only when they returned to safety. Parents became increasingly vigilant, using glances, gestures, and subtle corrections to prevent any deviation. The forest itself seemed to respond to these lapses. Fog thickened around those who strayed. Trails shifted unpredictably, and distant, unidentifiable noises filled the air. Even animals acted as enforcers. Dogs growled or retreated at the first sign of hesitation. Livestock avoided specific areas without explanation, and birds altered flight patterns as if signaling caution. Scholars visiting the region decades later documented these anomalies with confusion. Instruments provided inconsistent readings. Compasses spun without cause, and photographs captured shadows and shapes that defied logic. The villagers, however, had adapted completely. Awareness of environmental cues, adherence to ritual, and constant observation had become instinctual. Deviations were corrected immediately, often silently without confrontation. Fear was pervasive not only of the supernatural but of the unseen consequences of disobedience. Subtle punishments reinforced compliance. A misaligned talisman might cause an inexplicable draft or cold sensation, while repeated infractions drew the attention of other villagers, who administered corrections through gestures or whispered admonitions. The intensity of ritualized vigilance increased over time. Families meticulously performed daily prayers at exact hours, aligned household objects according to prescribed patterns, and observed silence during designated periods. The priest's legacy, though originating in a single lifetime, had become a self-perpetuating system of control. Shadows, fog, and environmental cues worked in concert with human observation to maintain order. Even the youngest children learned to read the forest and village with extraordinary precision. Tales of disappearances persisted, further cementing the consequences of deviation. A child might vanish, only to be whispered about in hushed tones, reinforcing vigilance in peers and adults alike. Over decades, the village became a community defined by tension. Every interaction, movement, and sound was loaded with potential significance. Scholars described a living system where psychological conditioning, environmental manipulation, and perhaps supernatural influence intersected seamlessly. Compliance ensured survival, curiosity invited danger, and the boundaries between reality and fear blurred. The village was no longer merely a place to live. It had become an organism sustained by ritual, observation, and the invisible authority of Father Anton. Visitors sensed the tension immediately upon arrival, often leaving with an unshakable feeling of being watched, guided, and evaluated. Over time, even newcomers adapted, either by adhering to unwritten rules or by leaving altogether. The rising tension in the narrative reflected a community where instinct and ritual had merged. Daily life was an intricate dance of observation, adherence, and subtle enforcement. The villagers' awareness of shadows, fog, whispers, and talismans created a pervasive sense of unease, making deviation nearly impossible. Each generation inherited these instincts, further embedding the patterns established by Father Anton. The village, enveloped in perpetual fog and shadow, existed as a living testament to fear, obedience, and the unknown. The subtle unease began to escalate into tangible fear. Shadows in the forest appeared closer, lingering at the edges of vision, and whispers carried through the village streets at night, guiding or warning villagers in ways they could not fully understand. Children reported seeing figures moving among the trees, silent, observing, vanishing when approached. Adults felt inexplicable pressure, a tightening in the chest or a sudden shiver when rituals were performed incorrectly or talismans misplaced. Families began to isolate further. Homes were locked earlier, windows covered, and nightly rituals extended in both duration and complexity. Even casual gatherings became tense, with neighbors watching one another for signs of deviation. The fog grew denser, forming barriers that obscured familiar paths and forced villagers to navigate cautiously. Trails that were once routine now felt unpredictable, as if the forest itself responded to mistakes or disobedience. Animals, too, acted as silent enforcers. Livestock refused to enter certain areas. Dogs barked at invisible threats, and birds' calls became irregular, echoing warnings that only the villagers seemed to understand. Disappearances, though infrequent, fueled the tension further. A child wandering too far, a family failing to align talismans correctly. Rumors suggested such missteps were met with swift, unseen consequences. These tales circulated quietly, reinforcing instinctive obedience and communal vigilance. Scholars visiting decades later noted the unique convergence of psychological and environmental control. Instruments malfunctioned, photographs captured anomalies, and the village's patterns of silence, ritual, and observation defied conventional explanation. The villagers themselves moved with extraordinary awareness, interpreting even the smallest signals from shadows, fog, and environmental cues. Parents trained children through subtle gestures and whispered corrections, embedding caution and vigilance as second nature. Every deviation, no matter how minor, was corrected promptly, sometimes through environmental feedback, sometimes through communal enforcement, and occasionally through unexplained disappearances. Over time, the village evolved into a self-sustaining organism of ritual and observation. Fear and reverence coexisted, shaping behavior and reinforcing compliance. Children grew into adults who maintained the rituals instinctively, understanding the rules without explicit instruction. Visitors often felt a chilling presence and invisible authority that seemed to measure every action. Even modern attempts to document or analyze the village were fraught with failure. Compasses spun, cameras distorted, and attempts at measurement produced inconsistent results. The rising tension climaxed in the villagers' complete internalization of Father Anton's legacy. Compliance, fear, and ritual became inseparable, guiding every action, thought, and movement. Shadows and fog, talismans and whispered warnings ensured that the village remained a place of perpetual vigilance. Deviations were rare, and those who dared to challenge the system were absorbed into the ongoing cycle of fear and control. The forest fog and environment acted in harmony with the villagers' own awareness, creating a network of enforcement that extended beyond comprehension. Even after centuries, the village's tension remained unbroken, a living testament to the enduring power of observation, ritual, and fear. Life was a continuous balancing act between adherence and transgression, guided by an unseen force rooted in Father Anton's original influence. The chilling atmosphere, environmental manipulation, and psychological conditioning ensured that the village existed as a singular entity, silent, watchful, and eternally under the control of its priestly architect. The culmination of centuries of obedience arrived unexpectedly, though the tension had been building for generations. One autumn night, a dense fog rolled through the village with unprecedented density. Shadows stretched unnaturally across streets and fields, shifting as if alive. Children awoke from uneasy sleep, sensing that something beyond the normal vigilance was at play. Parents tightened their grips, guiding them silently to perform additional prayers and realign talismans with meticulous precision. Father Anton's influence, though long deceased, seemed to manifest more forcefully than ever. Environmental anomalies intensified. Doors slammed without wind, shadows detached from their sources, and whispers filled empty rooms, repeating warnings and instructions in a dissonant chorus. In the village square, villagers gathered under the pretense of routine evening rituals. Every movement, every glance, every gesture carried heightened significance. A single misstep could provoke consequences that had become legend: disappearances, sudden illnesses, or unexplained phenomena. An unusual figure appeared at the edge of the fog, tall, cloaked, and motionless. Villagers froze, recognizing an entity they had only feared in whispered tales. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, each step causing the fog to swirl and twist unnaturally. Children clutched parents, elders whispered prayers, and a palpable tension gripped the air. Within hours, the village's routines collapsed into chaos. Shadows defied natural movement. Fog formed barriers that trapped villagers in their homes, and whispers instructed contradictory actions, forcing hesitation and uncertainty. Families attempted to follow rituals precisely, yet the pressure intensified, creating mistakes in alignment and timing. The figure moved closer to the central square, a presence that radiated both authority and menace. Fear became tangible, a weight pressing on every chest. Some villagers experienced visions, echoes of Father Anton's instructions, distorted and amplified, overlapping with warnings of unseen consequences. One by one, families reported sudden disappearances. A child vanishing while performing evening prayers, a livestock animal found dead under inexplicable circumstances, and a villager who entered the forest never returning. Panic spread, but even in terror, instinctive obedience dictated behavior. No one dared confront the figure directly. Movements were calculated, measured, and cautious. The climax was not a single act of violence or confrontation, but a perfect storm of environmental control, psychological tension, and supernatural influence. The village, collectively, became trapped in a cycle of fear and observation, unable to escape the invisible authority that had dominated life for generations. The figure's presence was fleeting yet absolute. Shadows extended unnaturally. Fog reacted to each subtle motion, and whispers penetrated even the most fortified homes. By dawn, the village remained intact physically, but the psychological and supernatural imprint of the night's events was irreversible. Families clutched one another, silently recognizing that the boundaries of obedience and fear had been tested and expanded. The climax demonstrated the full extent of Father Anton's influence, even centuries after death. His rituals, talismans, and environmental manipulations could be amplified to enforce ultimate control, merging fear, compliance, and mystery into a living, breathing system. The village had endured, but not without cost. As the fog began to thin slightly, the village remained in a state of tense paralysis. The strange figure, now receding into the edges of perception, had left a lingering influence that could not be ignored. Families emerged cautiously, inspecting homes, talismans, and ritual spaces for any disruption that might invite further consequence. Children, previously obedient, now exhibited subtle signs of fear and uncertainty, reacting instinctively to the shadows and the shifting fog. The psychological tension was compounded by the environment itself. Trees seemed to lean toward the village, branches forming unnatural patterns while the forest floor appeared to pulse with movement, echoing unseen footsteps. Animals behaved erratically. Dogs avoided certain homes, livestock huddled in corners, and birds circled with cries that seemed almost purposeful. The villagers' collective behavior became a precise reflection of centuries of conditioning. Every gesture, glance, and movement was influenced by a combination of fear, instinct, and ritualized instruction. Those who had momentarily faltered were quickly corrected through whispered reminders, silent signals, or minor environmental anomalies, doors closing on their own, shadows stretching unnaturally, or whispers that mimicked their own thoughts. Scholars visiting later described this night as the apex of the village's unusual behavioral system. A perfect interplay of psychological conditioning, environmental manipulation, and apparent supernatural influence. The figure's appearance, combined with the amplified fog and shadows, demonstrated that Father Anton's influence could manifest with extraordinary intensity even long after his death. Stories of the night spread quietly through neighboring regions, though outsiders rarely entered the village again. Some claimed that the events were exaggerated, yet those who had witnessed even fragments reported an overwhelming sense of observation, control, and fear. The climax cemented the village's identity as a place where silence, ritual, and obedience were paramount. Deviations were virtually eliminated, and even new generations born decades later internalized these lessons instinctively. The environmental and psychological reinforcement created a self-sustaining system. Shadows, fog, whispers, talismans, and ritual all combined to ensure absolute adherence. Though the figure vanished, its presence remained, etched into the villagers' collective consciousness. Life continued under an unbroken chain of influence, fear, and compliance. Parents passed down instructions to children, detailing precise rituals, the alignment of talismans, and the importance of observing shadows and fog. Even simple tasks like walking to the well or tending livestock were governed by subtle cues and adherence to learned patterns. By nightfall, the village returned to a tense normalcy. While the immediate crisis had passed, the psychological and environmental imprints of the climax lingered. Villagers moved with care, shadows and fog guided their paths, and the memory of the figure and its authority reinforced the system of control established centuries earlier. The climax was not an act of destruction, but a demonstration of total influence, how fear, ritual, and environmental manipulation could merge into a system that dictated life across generations. The village had survived, but it had been irrevocably shaped, a chilling testament to the enduring power of Father Anton's legacy. In the days following the climax, the village seemed outwardly unchanged, yet an undercurrent of unease permeated every household. Families inspected talismans, re-examined rituals, and retraced the paths they had traversed the previous night. Children moved cautiously, their instincts heightened by fear and experience. Even routine chores were performed with extraordinary precision, as though every action might invite consequences unseen. The fog remained dense, lingering longer than usual, while shadows clung unnaturally to walls, trees, and paths. Scholars visiting decades later documented these environmental anomalies, noting that compasses spun unpredictably, instruments failed, and photographs captured distortions beyond explanation. Stories circulated quietly of villagers who had faltered during the climax. Some disappeared without a trace. Others suffered sudden illnesses or misfortunes that could not be rationalized. Families whispered warnings to children, reinforcing lessons of vigilance, obedience, and awareness of environmental cues. The forest surrounding the village seemed complicit. Paths shifted subtly, revealing hidden markers or concealing familiar routes. Animals, acting in concert with the village's instincts, guided or warned humans through behavior that defied conventional understanding. Shadows and fog operated as a network of enforcement, maintaining order without direct intervention. Over time, the village internalized these lessons. Obedience became instinctive and compliance was maintained without overt fear of punishment. The legacy of Father Anton had transformed from direct influence to an embedded system of environmental, psychological, and ritual control. The villagers' perception of reality shifted subtly. Ordinary events were scrutinized for hidden significance, whispers and shadows interpreted as messages, and environmental cues constantly evaluated. Deviations were corrected silently, either through social enforcement or through the village's uncanny ability to manipulate perception and circumstance. Generations learned to navigate this network instinctively. Scholars noted the profound resilience of the community. Behavior shaped entirely by fear, ritual, and observation, reinforced by environmental and possibly supernatural forces. Over decades, the aftermath of the climax became woven into the fabric of daily life. Silence, ritual, and vigilance were no longer conscious choices but ingrained habits. Deviations were rare, and those who strayed were swiftly corrected or disappeared without explanation. Visitors reported a chilling atmosphere, a pervasive sense of observation, and an implicit warning that the village operated under principles beyond comprehension. The aftermath reinforced the lesson that survival depended not only on adherence to ritual, but on the constant awareness of shadows, fog, and unseen forces. Families passed down this knowledge meticulously, ensuring that even children understood the weight of obedience. The village, outwardly unchanged, remained a place of tension, vigilance, and controlled fear, a living testament to Father Anton's enduring influence. The long-term effects of the climax became more apparent as months passed. Villagers adapted to an intensified rhythm of vigilance, their lives measured by rituals, talismans, and environmental awareness. Even ordinary activities carried weight. Collecting water, tending livestock, or walking the paths surrounding the village required precise timing and alignment with both ritual and instinct. Shadows and fog acted as persistent reminders of the events, shifting unpredictably to test awareness and compliance. Children, now older, moved with an instinctive understanding of these cues. They could anticipate disturbances, adjust movements, and avoid areas deemed dangerous without conscious thought. Adults observed quietly, correcting deviations with subtle gestures, whispers, or by guiding environmental responses, closing doors, adjusting lights, or repositioning talismans. Scholars later described this village as a unique system, a living organism governed by fear, ritual, and environmental manipulation. Instruments often failed to measure anomalies. Compasses spun, cameras distorted, and attempts to map the forest or village produced inconsistent results. Disappearances, though rare, continued to reinforce the lessons. A child wandering beyond prescribed boundaries might vanish, leaving only whispers and shadows as reminders of unseen consequences. Adults maintained an almost ritualistic discipline in daily life. Meals were prepared according to precise sequences, objects arranged with exact alignment, and prayers performed at exact intervals. Deviations were corrected immediately, and the memory of the climax served as an ever-present warning. Visitors described the atmosphere as oppressive yet mesmerizing. The combination of environmental anomalies, psychological conditioning, and inherited ritual created a palpable sense of order and fear. The village had become a self-sustaining system of control, where every resident participated in maintaining equilibrium through observation, compliance, and subtle enforcement. Generations inherited these practices, ensuring that Father Anton's influence endured across centuries. Life was governed by instinctive awareness of shadows, fog, and environmental cues, creating a community that functioned as a single organism. Even after decades, the aftermath of the climax continued to shape behavior, thought, and perception. Silence, vigilance, and ritual were ingrained into the very identity of the village. The community remained a chilling testament to the power of fear, control, and the enduring legacy of a single influential figure. Every movement, glance, and decision reflected an intricate balance of compliance and observation, ensuring that the village persisted as a living monument to Father Anton's legacy. The aftermath was not merely the result of a single event, but the cumulative effect of generations shaped by ritual, fear, and the invisible hand of an authority long deceased. Despite centuries of observation and ritual, The village remained shrouded in inexplicable mysteries. Shadows moved independently, fog shifted with intelligence, and whispers carried messages only partially understood. Scholars, mystics, and travelers attempting to document these phenomena often left confused or unnerved. Instruments failed. Compasses spun endlessly, photographs distorted, and recordings captured sounds beyond human perception. Villagers accepted the unexplainable as part of life, integrating the mysteries into their routines and rituals. Talismans, once simple protective symbols, became conduits for interaction with unseen forces. Misalignment could provoke disturbances, doors opening spontaneously, shadows elongating, and whispers repeating personal fears. Attempts to rationalize these events failed. The village existed under principles that defied logic and science, maintained by environmental cues, psychological conditioning, and perhaps supernatural influence. Generations grew accustomed to these anomalies. Children learned to navigate shifting fog, avoid unpredictable shadows, and interpret whispers as guidance or warning. Adults corrected deviations instantly, whether caused by human error or environmental influence. The origin of the mysteries remained uncertain. Some believed Father Anton's spirit persisted, manipulating the village from beyond death. Others suspected the forest itself was sentient, enforcing compliance through subtle and intelligent means. Disappearances continued sporadically, reinforcing the perception of a living, observing system. Those who vanished left behind no evidence, only altered shadows, lingering whispers, or objects misaligned inexplicably. Scholars visiting over the centuries documented the phenomena with varying degrees of skepticism, yet none could fully explain the persistence of fear, ritual, and environmental manipulation. The mysteries were not limited to the forest or village infrastructure. Even natural events, storms, rainfall, and wind, seemed to react according to unspoken rules. Lightning struck certain areas while leaving others untouched. Rainfall intensified in paths that had been traversed incorrectly, subtly correcting deviations. Villagers interpreted these patterns as instructions, further embedding vigilance and obedience into daily life. The psychological impact was profound. Anxiety, fear, and respect for the unseen forces coexisted in a delicate balance. Even as adults, villagers moved instinctively, guided by shadows, fog, whispers, and inherited knowledge. The mysteries ensured that the legacy of Father Anton remained active. Compliance was not solely a moral choice, but a survival mechanism, enforced by unseen forces, environmental anomalies, and the internalized discipline of generations. Over time, the village evolved into a unique intersection of fear, ritual, observation, and the unexplainable. Life, though outwardly simple, was orchestrated by systems invisible to the outside world yet perfectly understood within. The mysteries were endless, reinforcing vigilance, obedience, and the chilling realization that some forces could never be fully comprehended or controlled. The village's mysteries deepened with each passing year. Shadows behaved unpredictably, extending, splitting, or converging at moments that seemed meaningful only to those attuned to their presence. Fog enveloped paths differently each night, sometimes guiding villagers, other times concealing invisible threats. Whispers, fragmented and elusive, carried both warning and instruction, compelling action without explicit clarity. Children internalized these anomalies as instinctual guidance, learning to anticipate shifts in the environment before they occurred. Adults, in turn, observed these reactions, reinforcing rituals and correcting deviations before they escalated. The forest surrounding the village acted as both protector and enforcer. Its paths shifted subtly, becoming more treacherous for those who failed to comply with established rituals. Animals served as extensions of the village's unconscious enforcement. Dogs would growl at invisible intruders, livestock avoided forbidden areas, and birds flew in patterns that signaled compliance or deviation. Disappearances, though rare, were interpreted as the village's ultimate corrective measure. A child straying from the path or misaligning a talisman could vanish without trace, reinforcing the necessity of vigilance. Scholars attempted to uncover the mechanisms behind these phenomena. Some hypothesized psychological conditioning combined with environmental manipulation. Others speculated on supernatural intervention. Instruments failed consistently. Compasses spun, cameras produced inexplicable distortions, and audio devices recorded unidentifiable sounds. Attempts to rationalize or replicate the village's anomalies were unsuccessful, emphasizing the singularity of this system of control. Over decades, the villagers' collective understanding of the unseen forces became comprehensive. They moved with precision, maintained silence when required, and performed rituals instinctively. Even newcomers adopted these behaviors quickly, guided by observation and subtle correction. The mysteries ensured that the village remained self-sustaining, its social and environmental order intact across generations. Life was defined not by individual choice but by an intricate balance of fear, ritual, observation, and respect for forces beyond comprehension. The legacy of Father Anton endured, its influence encoded into the landscape, shadows, and behaviors of the villagers. The environment itself reinforced compliance, creating a continuous feedback loop. Deviation invited subtle punishment, adherence brought safety, and the mysteries perpetuated vigilance. Even after centuries, the village functioned as a living monument to unseen power. Every shadow, every whisper, and every shift in the fog was a reminder of the unexplainable forces governing life. Scholars, visitors, and future generations could only witness fragments, yet the villagers experienced a total system of awareness and obedience. The mysteries of the village remained eternal, embedding fear, ritual, and vigilance into the very soul of its inhabitants, ensuring that the chilling legacy of Father Anton could never be undone. Centuries of ritual, fear, and obedience culminated in a village that existed as both sanctuary and prison. Life followed a rigid cadence dictated by shadows, fog, whispers, and talismans. Each generation internalized lessons passed down from elders, ensuring that Father Anton's influence persisted, invisible yet absolute. The village was silent at times, yet alive with subtle movement. The rustle of leaves, distant whispers, and flickering shadows reminded inhabitants of the power that governed them. Children grew up learning to navigate this delicate balance, moving instinctively, aware of hidden boundaries and unseen eyes. Adults performed rituals meticulously, aware that any deviation could provoke unseen consequences. The environmental anomalies, shifting fog, unpredictable shadows, and sentient-like forest paths, functioned as an extension of the villagers' collective vigilance, reinforcing the invisible system of control. Over time, the village became self-sustaining, an organism of fear and compliance. Scholars attempting to document the village's phenomena were often met with failure. Instruments malfunctioned, photographs distorted, and recordings captured sounds beyond comprehension. Even attempts to rationalize disappearances, whispers, and shadow movements fell short. The village existed beyond conventional understanding, shaped entirely by ritual, observation, and environmental manipulation. Its stories were whispered to outsiders cautiously, emphasizing mystery, fear, and the consequences of disobedience. Generations who remained compliant survived. Those who challenged the invisible authority rarely returned. The village's haunting presence extended beyond the physical, embedding itself in memory, ritual, and instinct. Every glance, movement, and decision carried weight. Silence was both protection and punishment. Shadows, fog, and whispers acted as enforcers, ensuring continued vigilance. Over decades, the village became a living testament to the chilling legacy of a single priest whose influence transcended mortality. The ending reflected both the preservation of life and the enduring consequences of fear. A community alive yet forever under invisible authority, where every action was measured and every deviation potentially fatal. The haunting atmosphere, environmental manipulation, and inherited ritual ensured that the village remained frozen in a perpetual cycle of vigilance, obedience, and mystery. The story concluded not with resolution, but with the realization that the influence of Father Anton persisted, eternal, shaping generations and controlling the invisible forces that defined existence. Life continued under a shadow, and the village remained a chilling monument to the power of fear, ritual, and the unknown. The village, though outwardly calm, existed in a perpetual state of tension and awareness. Shadows moved independently. Fog lingered longer than expected, and whispers continued to carry subtle warnings. Every villager, child, adult, and elder, internalized these anomalies, performing rituals with near-automatic precision. Compliance was survival. Deviation was unthinkable. The legacy of Father Anton had become indistinguishable from the village itself. Environmental cues, psychological conditioning, and inherited rituals combined into a single, enduring system of control. Even centuries later, visitors reported a sense of being observed, measured, and evaluated by forces beyond comprehension. Scholars attempted to analyze or document phenomena, yet instruments failed repeatedly. Compasses spun, cameras distorted, and sound recordings captured unidentifiable noises. Disappearances, though rare, continued to reinforce vigilance. The village operated as a self-regulating organism, where fear, obedience, and awareness ensured continuity across generations. Families taught children subtleties. The movement of fog, variations in shadows, and the cadence of whispers were all instructions encoded into daily life. Deviations were corrected silently, sometimes through social guidance, sometimes through environmental feedback, and occasionally through the mysterious vanishing of those who erred. Over time, the village became a monument to total control, a living system governed by principles invisible to outsiders, but understood instinctively by its inhabitants. Life was precise, ritualized, and deeply entwined with the unseen forces of the environment. Even as generations passed, the villagers' behavior remained perfectly aligned with centuries-old practices, ensuring the persistence of Father Anton's influence. The ending, haunting and unresolvable, illustrated that some legacies transcend mortality. The village, alive yet frozen in perpetual obedience, served as a chilling reminder that fear, ritual, and environmental manipulation can endure indefinitely. Shadows, fog, whispers, and talismans continued to guide, warn, and enforce. The villagers moved through life with vigilance ingrained, aware that the system they inhabited was eternal. The story concluded without resolution, leaving the village a haunting monument to the enduring power of unseen authority, psychological control, and the mysteries of a legacy that refused to fade. Silence prevailed, yet the presence of the past lingered in every shadow, every whisper, and every cautious movement of those who remained.